I am State Librarian Mary Susie, and I'm going to be presenting the annual report walkthrough today. And um, jump in as we go. If you have questions, feel free to stop me and ask me. Okay, so the annual report, or PLS, you will hear us use these terms interchangeably. They are both used and they both refer to the survey that public libraries fill out annually. The PLS stands for Public Library Survey. That is the term that the Institute for Museum and Library Services, or IMLS, who is our federal funding partner, uses. We collect the data, we submit it to IMLS, and then IMLS uses data from all of the state libraries to report out about public library trends. So that's why you fill out the annual report. That's the importance of it, is so that we get a national picture of what's happening at libraries. It helps the state library tell the story of what libraries are doing. It helps the IMLS tell the story of what's going on at libraries. It helps us when we talk to our legislators federally and at the state level, so that we can share all the awesome things that are going on across the state. I know I was a public library director for 13 years and I did the annual report every year. And I've shared this with some people. You may have heard me say this. When I started at the state library, like, I knew what I had to do for the annual report and I knew how much work that was for me. I never thought about what happened on the back end of the report. And so when I started at the state library, I was like, holy smokes, there's a lot more to this annual report than we see on face value as public library directors. So know that we at the state library share your pain with the annual report data. I know that you guys hear follow-up questions from Michelle. Michelle does a lot of work with the collecting and the gathering, and then making sure all the data works before we submit it to IMLS, because we want to give as complete a picture as possible of what's happening in North Dakota libraries. There we go. So the important dates for this year's annual report. The report will open on February 1st. It will close on March 31st. That March 31st is a firm date, we're hoping. We did extend the date last year for state aid. We did not extend the date, if I remember correctly, for the PLS. So I may be wrong on that. We might have extended both. I can't remember at this point. But the dates that you need to know are February 1st to March 31st of this year. We recommend starting early. We actually recommend starting on February 1st if you can. It takes some time to get the data, especially the financial data that you have to get for the PLS, as well as the state aid. I know that's a different webinar, but you know, we can't really talk about one in some instances without talking about the other. You have to get the fiscal data from your auditor for both. And so we actually recommend starting now with your auditor to ask for that information so that they can start preparing it if you've done either one before and know what you need to ask for. So start early, because you may run into some snags along the way. As with other years, you will submit your annual report in Counting Opinions. I have the website address there. You can access it from the state library's website as well. On the state library's website, you would go to the tab Services for Libraries and Educators, I think it says, but the Services for Libraries tab. Click on grants and you can get into the Counting Opinions portal that way, or you can get into it directly with this website address. If you need assistance with your login, if you don't have a Counting Opinions login, or you don't know what your library's Counting Opinions login is, or you've forgotten your password, or you're trying to log in and you can't, you want to contact the State Libraries Administration Office. You can do that via email at ndsladmn@nd.gov, or you can call us on the phone at 701-328-2492. That will get you directly to the State Library's office, the State Library's Administration Office, sorry. If you call our 800 number, you will get to our reference desk and they can transfer you to the admin office. So if you have the 800 number, that is also an option. That number is 800-472-2104. That might be the first thing that Abby is typing into chat. We're changing things up a little bit this year in the goal of making it easier and streamlining it for you guys. So Michelle is going to be your contact person, and her info is right on the screen there. And then again, you can also call that 2492 number, and that will get you to the admin office, and we can transfer it to Michelle very easily. But we're thinking that having one person serve as the contact versus in the past where we said go to your library development person, and then your library development person goes to the office, asks Michelle the question, Michelle gets back to Abby, Abby gets back to you. We're just eliminating the middleman in the hopes that it will make it easier for you guys. And so that is for both the PLS as well as state aid. So we have some tips and tricks for you. You want to make sure you're saving as you go along so that if something happens, and we all know with the internet, sometimes connections get lost or computers get funky. My technology gremlins have been really active lately, so definitely save as you go along so that you don't lose all of that hard work. You want to make sure you print a copy for your files before you hit submit. Once you hit submit, you cannot get back in. You want to submit when you are finished. So it's important that you hit that submit or we don't receive it. We know from conversations that some libraries prefer to print out a copy of the report, work on the paper copy, and then sit down and type the report in all at once. That is a completely personal preference. I know when I was doing the annual report, I preferred to just work online because I didn't want to have to do it twice. So it's really completely up to you for what your personal preference is. We have more tips and tricks, but wait, there's more for $9.99 plus double shipping and handling. You want, if you click on the question number, you will get the question definition. Now in past years, I know we sometimes read definitions to you. I'm not going to do that this year. We know that the question definitions are sometimes really hard to understand. We apologize for that. We don't write the definitions. If you have any questions as you're looking about the definition or what the question is asking, please call Michelle or email her and she'll get back to you as soon as she can. But we do want you to know that you can click on that question number and get the definition. Last year's numbers will appear next to the box. These can be helpful for you to use as a guide. The numbers should not be the same. They should be different. So you can't just copy last year's numbers, but it can help you to know if you're in the right ballpark of where you were last year. And if your numbers are really off, you know, that's a chance to take a minute and look at your numbers from this year and try and figure out why. Now, having said that, and I have this on a later slide, I will give the caveat that 2020, the numbers are going to be different. We all know that. I can't think of a different way to say it. Don't freak out when you see that your numbers for 2020 are so significantly different than your numbers for 2019. A lot of our libraries were closed. We know our circ numbers are down. Our circ numbers are down at the state library a little bit as well. That's okay. 2020 was a year, and we know there's going to be impacts. So last year's numbers will be there. Use them as a guide, but don't freak out this year when those numbers are significantly different. If your answer to a question is 0 or none, then put a 0. So for instance, if the question is about programs and children's programs and you didn't have any children's programs, you would enter a 0. If you had programs, but for some reason didn't count attendance, you would enter not applicable N/A if that figure is not available. I will add a caveat that if you enter NA on something for this year's report, please make a note of that for yourself. We're only in January, folks. it's not too late to start counting. So if you're answering NA, even if it's February and March, and you answered NA in the report for, as you're entering data from 2020, make a note of that so you can start counting your 2021 data. Ideally, our goal would be to have nobody entering not applicable for questions, because you're counting, what you need to count. If you have questions about that as you're going along, again, reach out and ask. If a box is grayed out, you can't change the data. The information was pre-filled by us. And if you need that data changed for some reason, it's as simple as sending Michelle an email or giving her a quick phone call, and she can help you with that. We have put together, and when I say we, at this point, I mean Abby has put together the PLS LibGuide. Now, if you don't know what a LibGuide is, it's just a fancy word basically for a bibliography. I'm showing my age there. We don't call them bibliographies anymore, but that's basically what a LibGuide is. It's just a place to pull all the information together on a particular topic. We have LibGuides on the PLS, library law, the COVID pandemic, the opioid epidemic. I'm blanking on the other LibGuides, but we have a whole list of LibGuides. How do you get to them if you don't have the specific address like you do for the PLS one? You go to our website, library.nd.gov. You click on the tab that says for libraries, and on the side there's this big blue cloud looking thing, and it says visit here to get to our LibGuides, or I'm paraphrasing. You click on the underlined blue LibGuide word, and that'll take you to the list of all the LibGuides. Or you go to https://library-nd.libguides.com. That will also get you directly to our LibGuides page. If you want to get specific to the PLS one, you add that /PLS. All the info you need about the PLS in one place. And I would encourage you, if you haven't checked out our LibGuides, spend a little time looking at them. There's a lot of really good information there. I know we have one on summer reading. So there's a lot of really good information about the topics. If there's a topic that you would like to see us develop a LibGuide about, this isn't strictly PLS, this is just a commercial. If there's a LibGuide you'd like to see us develop, please reach out and give us those suggestions. You can send me an email, you can send Abby an email, you can email Carmen Redding, our library services division director. We really want to develop LibGuides that are helpful to you, the library community. So if there's something you'd like to see us explore, let us know. But the LibGuide here is really handy, and if there's time after we've gone through all the information, I can pull that up and show it to you. So before you start, we've identified some resources that you're going to want to have at your fingertip. What goes where document, this is found on the publications page of the State Library, and it's exactly what the name says it is. It is a step-by-step guide of what goes, what information you need for the different questions on the PLS. The electronic resources spreadsheet, ELR, is also on our publications page. Now you get the monthly spreadsheet that has all of your data. And if you want to pull each of those and take the time to add up each individual database yourself, more power to you. But if you'd like to have all the information pulled together for you in one neat little spreadsheet, which lists your library's name and each of the ELRs and the totals, this is a place you want to go. And I see that I'm missing a half of a parenthesis there. But again, that's on our publications page. And if you scroll down under reports, you will find that there. How to determine website visits. For some reason, this is one of those questions that ends up on our challenging questions list every year. It's on this year again as well. If you have questions about this, you can certainly reach out and we can try and help you. If you are one of the My brain just completely fitzed out on me. If you are one of the libraries that we have developed a website for, then we can easily help you get that number. If you can't find it, you count visitors for those. But this sheet will walk you through how you can determine your website visits. If your website is part of a larger organization, like you're a page on the city website, you can use Google Analytics. If you haven't already set that up, this page will help you figure out how to set that up and how to use it. And there's a step you need to include a disclaimer if you're using Google Analytics. And then finally, you're going to want to have the public library standards document with you before you start this. The public library standards document does include a column in there. You essentially can use that document as a checklist. I'd encourage you, if you haven't done that for 2020, pull that document out, print it off our website, go through the checklist, use the checklist. It'll make it a lot easier to answer the public library standards questions if you've filled that checklist out. So what is new for 2021? Almost every single question has been reworded. Yay! We did that in the hopes that it will simplify the questions and make them more clear. The intent of the question hasn't changed. We've just reworded some of them. There are 2 new sections this year. There is a new COVID section and a new outreach section. And I'm going to talk about those in detail a little bit later on in the presentation. And then we have pulled all of the standards questions out and put them in their own section. We did this again to hopefully simplify it. At first glance, it's going to look like you're answering more questions. You're not. You answered all these questions before, but in the past, they were spread out throughout the annual report. We thought it would be easier to pull them together so that you can use that checklist that we've provided you. And also so that you're aware that it is a standards question. I want to remind you that this is the only place that we look to determine if you qualify for library vision grants for the next year. So the standards questions that you answer in February and March of this year will determine your eligibility for library vision grants for fiscal year 22, which is July 1, 2021 through June 30th, 2022. It's important that you take the time to read the questions, you take the time to answer them correctly. It's really important that if you have any questions about the standards, that you take the time to ask them. Because we want you to be compliant with the standards so that you are eligible for the library vision grants. In my ideal world, all public libraries have qualified at the developing level so that all public libraries qualify for these library vision grants. This year we have 30, I didn't make this note on my presentation. I want to say it was 35 libraries that qualified at the developing. I'm somewhere in the right ballpark, somewhere in the 30s. We had 4 libraries that qualified at the excelling, and then 3 libraries that qualified at the future focused level. So we'd like to see that number increase. So take the time. We do know we have some public libraries that the auditor fills out the bulk of the public library report. I want to encourage you that before your auditor submits it, that you either work with them or you preview the document before it gets submitted, and paying particular attention to the standard section. Because again, it doesn't matter if we've had multiple conversations with you and we know that you're compliant. If you don't answer the questions accurately in the annual report, you will not be considered compliant, and therefore you will not be eligible for the library vision grants. Okay, edit checks. When are edit checks triggered? An edit check is triggered if the answer is 0, if the answer is the exact same as last year, or if it's very different from last year. So answers for most questions should not be the same from year to year. You don't have the same program attendance, you don't have the same number of programs, you don't have the same website visits, you don't have the same database usage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you have the same number from last year, just know you're going to get a follow-up email from Michelle to say, is this correct? If your answers are really different from last year, you're going to get a follow-up email from Michelle. Again, there's that caveat that we know there will be many edit checks triggered this year. Please don't get upset by this. We will do our best to make this process the least cumbersome as we can for you. Know that we're going to probably have to follow up with every single library this year. It's just the nature of what 2020 brought to us. But
Also,
we really
sorry.
will try and make it as painless as possible.
Also, if they annotate any edit checks in the process of completing their reports, there will not most likely be follow-up from me beyond that.
Okay. So if you add an explanation, then and the explanation is adequate enough, then Michelle will not have to follow up with you. That's a good thing to note, Michelle. Thank you. The other thing we wanted to note is if you are a new library director and you're filling this report out for the last time, we know that the stats are sometimes vary wildly when a new library director starts, because the stats may have been counted differently. You may not know how your predecessor counted them. I know the first time I filled out the annual report, every single answer just about was different, and it was wildly different. I've shared the story with my staff, with the state library staff internally, that the first year that I did the report, I got a call from the state library. They didn't just email me, they called me, and I was really sweating. I actually thought I might lose my job because our numbers were that significantly different. So my other suggestion to you is keep notes on how you gather some of the data. One of the areas that was really different was our door count when that first year that I did it. Our CERT count was different as well, and there was a reason for that. But our door count was wildly different. If you don't have an automatic door counter, and I believe the majority of our libraries do not have automatic door counters, there's several ways that you can gather that information. Just like for reference questions, there's a couple different ways you can gather it. One of the things you can opt to do is choose a typical week several times throughout the year, count the number of patrons that come through your doors, and then you extrapolate that information. So if you count a typical week each quarter, and then you would multiply that out, by that, or you count for 2 weeks and then you multiply out, you take the average of those 2 weeks and then you multiply that average out to get to the number of weeks that you're open throughout the year. If that's confusing, feel free to give Michelle a holler and ask her to clarify that. So just know if you are a new library director and your numbers are wildly different, we'll work with you on that. Don't freak out by that. I would add, don't freak out by anything when it comes to the annual report. Yes, it's work. I'm not going to say it's not. Like I said, I did it for 13 years. The data is really, really important. I'm probably not even adequately explaining why it's so important. This year in particular, we all know we have had people who have come into our library and made that "I pay your salary" comment. But the other comment that we've all had is, well, why are libraries important? I can get everything that I need on my phone, or I can get it all online. I don't even need the library. And my answer to that is, sure, you can get a lot of things online, but not everyone can get everything online. Not everything is free online, despite the impression that everything is. And my favorite quote, and it's not mine, I wish I could give the source credit who came up with it. I actually used it in my testimony the last time I testified in front of the legislature. My number one answer for why libraries are important, besides the whole bridging the digital divide and the, the haves and the have-nots, is Google will bring you a million answers. The librarian will help you get to the right answer, right? And so it is important to have this data to show the value that libraries bring. I'm working on my testimony. I'm giving testimony tomorrow in front of on the House side of the legislature about the state library's budget. And every year when I give testimony, we include the infographic with the data from the previous year's public library annual report. And one of the things that's on our infographic is, once again, we had more visits to North Dakota state libraries we're using 2019 data, in 2019 than all Vikings football games, NDSU home football games, state fair, Hoostfest, the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally. Libraries are important, folks. They matter. I think it's 1 in every 3 North Dakotans has a public library card. That's why this data is important, so that we can tell your story to the legislators, so we can show your value. So I'll step off that soapbox for now. I'll probably get on it again before the end of the webinar here. Everybody's favorite part of the webinar, challenging questions. Again, this is a very similar list to the challenging questions we had last year. We would love to figure out how we can make these less challenging. So if these questions are challenging for you, please reach out to Michelle, reach out to me. This is the one area where I'm going to say feel free to reach out to Abby for a conversation about how we can demystify these questions. So 4.5, and a huge thank you to Michelle for giving me the question numbers. 4.5 is the annual library director's salary. Really not sure why this one is so tough. We're simply asking, what did the library pay the person who runs the library to run the library last year? What was the amount that got paid? Now, if there was a librarian that served for 3 months and a different librarian that served for 9 months, I think that's right, 9 plus 3. Yeah, that's right. Then you would add what the librarian got paid for the 3 months and what the librarian got paid for the 9 months to come up with the 12-month salary. We're simply asking, what did the person who ran the library make for the year? Employee benefits. This cannot be zero. It is not simply talking about insurance benefits. It is talking about workers' comp, Social Security, Medicare, FICA, unemployment that the library pays into. So this number cannot be zero if you have paid staff. And this is a number that your auditor should be able to help you figure out if you don't know what it is. 9.4B, wireless sessions. This continues to give people struggles. If you are struggling with this, please reach out to Ryan or Cindy Olson in our IT department. Ryan and Cindy have created a mechanism for gathering this data, especially if you're on one of the Juniper routers, or really, I believe for all, they can help you get this number. Why is this number important? It's the same reason I'm going to say it's important when we get to the outreach section. There are still people out there in 2021 who think either libraries are irrelevant, or who think that all libraries do is check out books to people. I know I'm preaching to the choir on this one. Libraries do a lot more than check out books to people. We do programs, we do STEM, we do summer learning or summer reading. I'm old school. So we help with the summer slide. You know, for some people, we provide their access to the world of information because we provide them access to Wi-Fi. We saw that in the pandemic, right? We saw a number of our libraries during 2020 who boosted their Wi-Fi outside the 4 walls into their parking lot. We saw a number of our libraries who started leaving their Wi-Fi on 24/7. Now I'm taking off my state librarian hat and just putting on my Mary Sue C. librarian, former library director hat. Even though a state librarian could say the same thing, but I strongly encourage you, if you are shutting your Wi-Fi off, really think about why you're shutting your Wi-Fi off. Why do we only want to give people access to information the hours that we're open, especially right now if we still have limited hours? All right, putting the state librarian hat back on. I'll get off that mini soapbox. So Wi-Fi sessions, that's why Wi-Fi sessions are important. Again, it helps us tell the story of our value to our communities, and especially in a rural community or in a community that has, you know, a higher incident of the have-nots, of the poor, of the digital divide. Use whatever terminology you want. We are providing necessary access to folks. You know, now when kids are sometimes going to school online, how do you do that if you don't have access at home? And providers have done a good job. ITD has done a good job. Dakota Carrier Network has done a good job of working through the pandemic to try and get people connected. But we know there's a lot of people that still aren't connected. Reference requests. This one still confuses people. What is a reference request? Now there's a big long federal definition, right? I'm gonna sum it up pretty easily. It's a question you answer for a patron that's not directional. What's a directional question? Where's your fiction books? And the most common one, where are the bathrooms? And where are the public computers? Those are directional. So any question you answer that gives the people a direction on how to get to somewhere in your library, don't count those. Any other question where you're giving information to a patron, count that. So what's information? It's when you exchange, right? If a patron comes up and says, I have read all of the Patricia Cornwell books or all of the John Grisham books, really liked them. Can you recommend another author for me? Reference request, that's reader's advisory, that counts. If a patron says, I got this one recently, I was working the reference desk, a patron called up and said, I'd like you to send me 2 books. Great, what 2 books? I'd like 2 books. Any 2 books. Yep, I'd like 2 books on war, historical, kind of real, kind of truthful. Okay, so we're looking for historical fiction around war. That was a fun one to do, guys. And I got that twice from the same patron, 2 months in a row. I loved it, right? That counts as a reference question. If you are helping a patron one-on-one at the computers, and we know you guys are doing that now. We know people are getting help creating email addresses, filling out unemployment, filling out tribal related forms, filling out all kinds of things. We know you guys are helping them with that. That counts if it's one-on-one. Now, if you're teaching a computer class, even if only one person shows up, that's a program. But if it's one-on-one help at the computer, that's reference. Hopefully that clarifies it for you guys. Again, if you have questions on whether it counts as a reference question, you can ask Michelle. Feel free to throw that one out to me too. I've worked with that data for 13 years and I can help walk you through it. This is really one where we don't want the answer to be NA. If you are not counting your reference requests, please figure out a way today, January 13th, yep, 2021, to start counting those reference questions. Again, why is it important? It shows your value to your community. We're going to be fighting hard for dollars this year, guys. We all know it, right? There's going to be economic impacts on our local communities from the pandemic. I want you guys to be able to say to your funding partners, look, this is what we did in 2020. We did curbside. We answered reference questions via email. We provided a place for people to go when they had to get out of the house and couldn't go anywhere else. Universal class, databases, solid information, not fake news, all of those, right? Pull all that data together in an infographic that you give to your funding partners when you do your annual report to your funding partners, which by law you're required to do. That's a different session, but I couldn't help but throw that in. It's really, really important that you count this data. 10.3 regular users / library card holders. I think,
Mary,
yeah,
can I ask a question
please.
about requests?
Absolutely.
What if they're wondering if they call you over to the computer and ask how they get to the internet or how they print? How do I print something? Do those count as?
I would count those because you're giving them information. You're showing them how to. There's an exchange of information. That's different to me than how do I get to the bathroom? Does that make sense?
Yep. Thank you.
Because if you look at it this way too, part of a reference request, we're sharing information. The next time they need to print, they may not need to ask you. Hopefully the next time they need to use the bathroom, they're going to be able to find it on their own, but you may have to tell them again, you know. But the point of a reference request is to share data and information that expands their knowledge. Teaching someone how to print, in my world, expands their knowledge. Awesome question, Jesse. Anybody else have questions on the reference requests? Okay. 10.3, regular users / library card holders. I think the reason that this one is confusing to people is our non-automated libraries, or even some of our automated standalone libraries, don't issue physical library cards. That's true. That's okay. When we're asking library card holders, we're asking how many people have privileges to use your library collection, whether you give them a physical card or not. And right now during the pandemic, we have some users we're issuing, you know, remote cards to. We're not giving them the physical card, we're giving them the barcode. They still count as a library user. They still have access to our materials. So that's what this question is asking. If there's any questions about that, ask them now, put them in chat, reach out to Michelle. I wish that was the end of our challenging questions, but there's more. 10.6, physical items circulated. I'm going to be completely frank here, guys. As someone who filled this report out for many years, I don't know why this one is confusing to people. It's your circulation numbers. If you are not automated, and again, maybe that's where the confusion comes in, you have to figure out a way to count this metric. And you need to figure out a way to do it consistently and accurately. The first time I got up to give testimony, I'm pretty sure it was my first session. Cindy can correct me if it wasn't, but I'm pretty sure it was the first time. And I know it was on the House side. When I started sharing the data from the annual report, I actually had a legislator hold up his phone and say, and he's not a legislator anymore. I won't name him. Some people know his name already, but he actually grabbed his phone and said, you know, I can't tell you the last time I was even in a public library. I've got one of these. Why do I need a library? And I was stunned. And I was like, and actually my response was, well, Representative so-and-so, you just broke this librarian's heart a little bit. And I actually put my hand over my heart. And as the words are coming out of my mouth, I honestly thought, there's a great gig being state librarian in North Dakota for a year, because I really was like, oh shoot, I shouldn't be saying that to a legislator. It actually was great that I said it, because it everybody started laughing, and it kind of changed the whole tone of no, that was my second session, I think, because it was the year we got the construction funding. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Then he followed that up as I started sharing the data and he's like, oh, what? Do they just put a bunch of hashtags on a piece of paper? And as a librarian, I was offended by that. Like, we are about the data, folks. We are about accurate information. Guys, don't make me a liar. Make it accurate information. And I said, no, most of our libraries are automated. They run reports. If they're not automated, they have a solid process. So this data is honest and true. Make sure your data is honest and true. The reason this number is important is it's one that we have been collecting since day one of collecting library data. Yes, we are moving into an era where qualitative is as important as quantitative. You have to be able to tell those stories of impact, but you need the quantitative data to back up your qualitative stories, right? You need to be able to say why you're impactful, and then you need to be able to show you're impactful. People get this number. People understand this is the number of items we circulated. There's a lot of library terms that we use. There's a lot of acronyms that we use, OLR, ELR, e-resources. People don't get what that means, right? That's a library term. People know what circulation means. They know when I want to check out my book, I go to the circulation desk. Like, we've trained people. This is a really, really important number, and it shows the difference you're making in your community, especially when that number goes up. Sometimes the number is going to go down, and that's okay. Sometimes the number goes down because of a pandemic. Sometimes the number on physical items goes down, but the number on e-items goes up. You have to have the data so you can tell your story. Again, I'll get off that soapbox now. Website visits, the number of times the library's website was visited. Again, if you have a WordPress website, that's the word I couldn't come up with earlier. If you have a WordPress website, this number is really easy to get. It's the number of visitors, not the number of views, but the state library can walk you through how to get that number. And that document I referenced earlier about how to count your website numbers, it walks you through step by step if you're a WordPress website. What does that mean if I'm not a WordPress website? Well, let me tell you, for the low price of $0, you can have the state library help you develop a website for your library. The state library pays the hosting fees for you. The state library can help you develop it. And if you have a WordPress website and it's stagnant, you're not updating it, you're not making changes to it, it's just static, you may very well get a call from Brianne or Abby, Brianne Meyer, our marketing specialist, or Abby Ebach, our public library specialist, saying, hey, we should really help you update your WordPress website, right? Website more and more is the first step some people are going to take to your library. And it is so, so important that your website be engaging, that it pull people in, and that shares the information people want to know about your library. Namely, what are your hours? What do you have? What do I need to use your library? If you don't have a WordPress website and you are interested in a WordPress website, you can reach out to our marketing specialist, Brianne Meyer. I believe that's correct contact, right, Abby? They reach out to Brianne, not you. And that email address, which I'm sure Abby is typing into the chat as I'm speaking it, is ndslpa@nd.gov. ndslpa for public affairs at nd.gov. If you don't have a website, if you are simply using Facebook as your sole source of communications, you are not in compliance with the developing level of the standards, and you will not be eligible for library vision grants. And the reason for that, as you can tell by my little mini soapbox I got on, is we really believe it's important. Social media is important too. Don't get me wrong. It is important. And it is one means of communication. But there are people who, for all kinds of reasons, don't use social media. That cannot be your sole source of communication with your community. You need a website, and you need a dynamic website, not one that you just put up once and never look at again. 10.13 and 10.14 are interlibrary loan. So these are items borrowed from another library or items that are lent to other libraries on behalf of a patron. So either you got a book from the state library to lend, check out to your patron, or you sent a book to the state library for us to check out to our patron. That's what these two questions are asking. For Odin libraries, please note, this question is asking about items that you sent to a non-Odin library. So out of system. I use that term because that's a term that sticks with me from Illinois. And as I'm looking at it again, I realize that's probably not a North Dakota term yet. So it means out of system. When I say out of system, I mean non-Odin libraries. If you're sending books within Odin, that's getting counted by Odin, right? That's getting counted by Polaris. If it's something you borrowed from another library, it gets counted as a circulation at your library. If it's something that you lent, it gets counted as an hold, and those are reports that Odin is going to run for you. If you are an Odin library, they will be running their reports and sending them to you very soon.
Janet says, wouldn't this be double dipping if we count the items checked out to another library with physical items circulated as well?
So the physical items circulated are the items that you check out in your library. The items you send to another library count on your end as an ILL, but they count on the other end as an item circulated, because it is action on both ends, so it's not double dipping.
But
Because
Mary,
your library did send it out and that library did check it out.
Mary, this is Rita.
Mhm.
What we're talking about is, and this was part of what we did in our Odin training even this morning. So we get something in from another library, but we enter it into our system so that we can check it out to our patron, which keeps track of who's got it and when.
Oh,
And for us here in Minot, like if we send something to the state library,
mhm.
it's checked out in our Atrium system to the state library, so it automatically gets counted as a physical item checked out. And we could probably just subtract it. It never struck me, but I think we've always counted those things twice, basically. It's
Because
not
you're
a-
counting it as an item circulated and as an ILL.
right.
And that's probably always been the case for many of us, actually.
Yeah.
See, that's what happens when you let the state librarian who used to fill out this report do the webinar. I cause problems. I mean, if there's an easy way to, I mean, I think the easiest way in Janet, in your case, and I'm not sure Rita in your case, but would be to subtract the number of ILLs from your circulation. But there's a part of me that says do it the way you've always done it, honestly, so that there's consistency. I'm a big fan of consistency in the annual report so that you're reporting the same thing. So if it were me, I'd probably keep doing it the way I had been doing it.
And Mary, when I
Mhm.
talked with Lynn at the Odin office today, she had indicated to me that she was having trouble accessing reports for the Polaris libraries that would determine their ILLs for the 2020 year. She wasn't sure she could get it refined as far as the date for just the 2020 year. So she was
That's
going to do
weird.
she was going to do some more checking with the vendor to see if she could get that report isolated to just 2020 data or not. So
Okay.
that's kind of up in the air on that end yet too.
Well, I'm going to go on the record as saying that's dumb. You should be able to do an annual report. So that's, hopefully they can figure that out. But Janet and Rita, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, probably as close as it can be anyway.
I mean,
It's going to be different this year, especially for us with the Odin things that we won't add in, because those are things that always would have been added before.
right. Yep. And it's going to be different because of the I mean, there's a lot that's going to be different anyway, but in terms of how you've done it, I would count it the same so that there's consistency in the data. Programs. I love library programs. So if you are not doing library programs, do them. Start. If you're not doing library programs for all ages, do them. Start. I know for some of you, you've tried programming in the past and it's a challenge, especially for certain age groups. I get that. But try them again. It's a different world we're living in. So you want to include all programs that the library holds. I think one of the things that gets confusing about programs are programs that happen in a series. So I have a 6-week storytime program that counts as 6 programs. So each session counts as an individual program. I know that's confusing because we think of storytime as one program, as the library practitioners, as the person doing the program, but each one counts individually. Virtual programs. I know this is a huge question for you guys. How do we count the virtual programs we did this year? And I am going to be very frank and say the North Dakota State Library has a different opinion than the federal definition of this. However, we are required to follow the federal definition. So for virtual programs, you count them if they were live. So pre-recorded programs. So if you pre-recorded Storytime and shared it to Facebook, YouTube, Skype, whatever, that does not count as a program. If you did a program live that you also recorded and have archived it on the web, Facebook, YouTube, whatever, only count the engagements from the live presentation. So if there was an opportunity for your patrons to interact with your staff as they presented the program virtually, it counts as a program. I'm going to pause here for a moment because I'm assuming there may be some questions on this.
Well, I can pretty much guarantee you that's not the way we recorded it, and that's not the statistics that you guys are going to get, because there is no way I can split that information out at this point. If it was a program, I don't understand the difference in the definition of something that was pre-recorded versus something that was done live as a live Facebook. I don't understand what the difference is as far as that definition, because that doesn't make any sense to me. If it was a program, it was a program. You know, and if we were doing a library program and it was being done by a DVD class or something like that, or if it was something like that's, we're dealing with pre-recorded media also. So I think this definition's quite, as you Mary, as I'm sure you will know, I don't mince words. I think this definition's idiotic. And I know you didn't make it, and I know you don't disagree with it, but I think it is. It's idiotic.
I am not going to go on the record to say I agree.
I know, and you don't have to,
but
and I will state it.
Unofficially taking off the state librarian hat and putting on the I'm a former library director who did this report for 13 years, I concur wholeheartedly. Flipping off and putting on the state librarian hat.
Yeah,
I will share with you though, Steve, I will share the reasoning for it. And this was a very spirited debate on the state data coordinators listserv. When we get to curbsides, I'm sure you're going to be sharing some non-minced words with me again. And we really went to bat for you guys on curbside and we lost. But the thought is, if it's pre-recorded and there's no opportunity to interact, then a program includes interaction between the staff. And it's kind of like you don't count passive programming. So if you have a program where you set out, you know, coloring sheets on a topic once a month in your library and people come in and color the sheets, you don't count that as a program.
Yeah, you do. Absolutely you do. That counts as a program. It was a program that was set out. It was a program that was done passively, but it's still a program. If we didn't do it, it wouldn't be a program. So
per the federal definition, that's not a program.
Yeah, well, the federal definition is obviously made by people who don't ever work in a library or have no clue as to what they're talking about. I'm sorry to put it that way, but if anything that is a library program is a program, whether it's done actively, passively, in the building, out of the building, it's still a program. It is part of what we do. And this is something that I'm talking, with our stakeholders about is, what is a library and what, and it is what we have and what we do. What we have is the collection, and that's the circulation statistics and so on. The what we do is all the programs and stuff. And that old version of the library's book warehouse is dead because of the fact that programming is so intricate or so integral to what we do now as a modern library. So anything that is a program should be counted as such, and any participation in that program should be counted as such. So if we put a coloring sheet out on a table, and by the end of the month, 3 of them have disappeared, that's 1 program, 3 participants.
How have you interacted with the patrons that are picking up the coloring sheets?
We put the program out there, made it available. That's the interaction. It's not that there are programs that we don't necessarily have much in the way of interaction, if you want to look at it that way. If we if you're hooking it on to library staff patron interactions with the program, let's say we have somebody from the extension office do the program start to finish, other than, hi, this is so-and-so from the extension office, please welcome them. And then they do the program. And thank you very much for coming. At that point, staff really hasn't had the interaction other than thank you, welcome, and thank you.
It's not necessarily interaction just with the library staff, but it's interaction between folks. It's kind of that difference between a reference question and a directional question, informational versus directional. Direct engagement versus indirect engagement. I'm not going to argue with you on this, Steve, because quite frankly, and Michelle's going to walk in my office and kick me under my desk for saying this. Maybe we can edit it out of the recording, Abby. I don't disagree with you. I agree. A program is a program, whether it's passive or active, a program is a program.
Right.
But I'm obligated to say, per the definition, this is what should be counted.
And I get that, and I respect that part of what you're saying. There's no way that we have not recorded it that way. So that statistic is not going to be, it's going to be recorded the way we recorded it.
Yep.
Tough.
Here's the one thing I will say, Steve, and everyone else on the call or on the webinar. Please make sure you are counting consistently. So if you count a passive program, we put out a coloring sheet for a month, 3 coloring sheets get taken, 1 program, 3 sheets. Next month, 1 program, 5 sheets. Next month, 1 program, 10 sheets. Be consistent how you count. Don't count it 1 month and then not count it the next. That to me is a bigger issue, is that we have to be consistent in what we count and what we report, and not just within the year, but from year to year to year. That's why I said earlier, keep notes for yourself on how you counted your programs, so that next year you count the programs the same way.
Well, and since we've moved so much to virtual, we've worked very hard on trying to determine how are we going to count some of this stuff. Does this, Facebook views, it's got 300 of a program, but maybe YouTube views has 4. Well, we're kind of defaulting to the smaller one because we know what our program numbers were from previous years. And so how that compares. The Facebook views will show up on our Facebook statistics instead.
There you go.
So
yep.
We're not necessarily cheating the numbers up because we're reporting it in a different manner.
As someone who did this report for so many years myself, I totally agree with what you're saying, Steve. And again, my biggest concern is that the data we report for North Dakota is consistent and accurate. So please make sure, and as we are switching to virtual, it is so important, whether you're staff of one, like Tracy Lund doing cartwheels on the camera, or you're a staff of 5 at Valley City, or you're a staff of 150 at Fargo. It's important that you have 7, sorry. I was throwing out numbers. Actually, Tracy is a staff of 3, I think, with 2 part-timers. So, but it's important that you have the conversation, whether it's with yourself or with each other and with your board, so that you're all on the same page and counting consistently.
Yeah, and I respect that part of it, and that is, we are going to turn in the count. The corollary of that question is, now that we are pushing virtual, when we go back to normal, we are going to be continuing to do virtual programming, because we have people who live out in the county that have appreciated the fact that we've got virtual programming that they couldn't come in for. We live in North Dakota, and by Friday of this week, we're going to be up to our eyeballs in snow.
What?
What?
Well, all right, at least the eastern part of the state is going to be up to our eyeballs in snow with 3 to 5 and 45-mile-an-hour winds.
Keep that on the eastern side of the state,
Yeah,
please.
I guess you guys are going to luck out. But we're going to continue making virtual a segment of our programming. And we'd already determined this a number of months ago. And then, as I've been reading in professional literature, a lot of other libraries are coming to this same conclusion. This virtual stuff's important. So I don't know if we necessarily, thank you, Kristen. I don't know if we necessarily have to start thinking about, do we need to start recording physical in-person statistics for programming and things like that, and a virtual as a second set of data? I don't know. And that's something that you're going to probably have to kick back out to the federal government, because I remember reading a couple of months ago, the guy that's at New York Public was talking about that is going to, virtual is going to become a very large component of what they do moving forward.
Right. And some of that also comes down to the qualitative versus quantitative that I was talking about, and that it's really important to be able to tell the story and back it up with the data. But we will, and when I say we, I mean Michelle, will make note of that comment about, do we need to count physical and virtual separate? And if that's a piece of data that would be helpful to North Dakota libraries, even if they opt not to do it at the virtual, or I'm sorry, at the federal level, we can still do it at the state level. So we'll be looking for some feedback from you guys on that question. If you have thoughts on it, please reach out to Michelle or reach out to Abby, either one, if you think it's important that we count those separately. And I do think it's important, because I think it tells another layer of the story, especially in North Dakota, where we're rural, and we do have libraries that cover the whole county. And, you know, maybe that's only 1,000 people, but 900 of that 1,000 people have to travel an hour and a half to get to the library. Well, now we're serving them in a new, exciting way. Virtual programs are really exciting to me for that reason, but definitely how to count them is definitely needs some further conversation.
And that was addressed already, the basically passive virtual programs and counting them and reflecting them. We were advised by IMLs and their constituents or whatever that we could ask for them at the state level as a separate number, but they would not roll up to the federal level and be considered as programs.
Yes, and that's
for this year. And
I understand that, Michelle, but if Steve is counting passive programs and he has counted them that way consistently, I'm not going to tell him to stop. To a certain extent, that's a local control issue to me. So, I know you and I don't agree on that, but that, you know, as long as it's consistent and they count the programs the same way, then I think that's where we leave this.
Jackie did post something in chat, and I glanced through it. Jackie, if I screw this up, I'm sorry. But she did make a point of maybe we should start looking at our virtual programming as a separate entity and start counting it separately. I think that's a valuable thing. And having not thought about that, I think that this is something we should do moving forward. Whether or not we report it to a state level or a national level, I think if we are going to be doing virtual program, I think it's important just for our own internal metrics to know, are we getting return on investment.
Mhm. Mhm.
So,
And I do think there's value on counting it at a state level as well, Steve. I
agreed.
think, you know, anytime I can tout what our libraries are doing, whether it's to, you know, so this year I had an opportunity, and we haven't had this before since I've been here. I had an opportunity to actually do a shout out to the governor's office for the state of the state. And of course, that was what are the great things the state library is doing, but I can't ever answer that question without also including great things that are going on at libraries. And so I talked about our libraries that flipped to curbside to continue serving patrons and started doing virtual programs and our online summer reading kickoff and all of that stuff. So any data that we can get from you guys that show a fuller picture, and we take that infographic when I go to Washington D.C. in May to meet with our federal legislators as well. You know, so our federal legislators know how many people are using libraries and have library cards, and that's important because, you know, as federal legislation is introduced for libraries, it's important that our legislators at the federal level have an idea of what's going on in libraries at the local level, so they know it's important to support that funding. And I always reach out to them and say, here's why it's important. But, you know, and I say, pull out that infographic or pull out that data or, you know, whatever. So.
Well, and for myself, you know, we are a city county library.
Mm-hmm.
And so approximately half of our funding comes from the city and half comes from the county. But if you look at library usage statistics, city residents are getting a disproportionate advantage of libraries. So I am, and this is something I've been focused on the last year, 8 years since I started here.
Mm-hmm. I know you have.
How do we get market penetration into the county using, you know, our for-profit brothers terminology.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jackie, same thing. Is that, and I think virtual is going to be that ticket. So I think it is worthwhile.
Yep.
To do that. So
virtual programs and e-resources. That's the way that you can reach those farthest corners of your, you know, of your library. Yeah. And then the state level interlibrary loan, you know, using us to mail books to your patrons as well.
Yeah.
So perfect. That was a great conversation. So thanks for starting it off. And I gather there's some conversation in the chat as well. So excellent.
Not a question, but a comment maybe. This is Rita. Of course, we had already asked this question and knew it, and we had some dismay from staff. But for everyone's encouragement, we're going to follow the rules and fill out the public library service report the way we have to. That does not stop us when we go and give reports to our city commission and other places from recording or reporting the rest of those numbers. And in our case, at least, that's what we're going to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Rita. I wholeheartedly applaud that. I'm going to do Abby's little dance at that because I think that's the way to do it. Absolutely. For the record, I think you should, if you can, follow the rules. But if you can't, if there's no way to determine if it was viewed live or not, then I think you count the numbers. The part of why I disagree with this is I think we're doing a disservice to our public libraries that maintain services during the pandemic, and we're not letting them tell that story.
This is Betsy from the Fargo Public Library, and I have a question about like a passive type of program.
Mm-hmm.
Like we do a book talk or something on Facebook, and it lasts like Monday through Friday, and I don't know if we can count our interactions during that time, or you know, that doesn't stop people from commenting afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Is a passive program like that counted in a program? People respond directly during the week.
So is that your I liked this author, tell me who to read next?
No, we have I forget at the moment what they're called. I'm not part of that. But it's like it lasts a couple of days. I don't know what the program is called.
Okay. So if any part of it was held live, it can be counted. if you go per the definition, passive programs should not be counted. I'm going to go back to my, if you counted them in the past, continue to count them consistently. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, yes and no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the official definition would say no, that Betsy, that does not count. But we have libraries that they have always counted that. And I think if you've always counted it, you continue to count it, because again, part of data collection is consistency so that you can compare apples to apples every year. So some of the libraries said they're counting their take and make programs or their make and take programs, because in their definition of a program, that's a program. But per the definition, it should not count.
This is Betsy again.
Yep.
So kind of going on what Rita had just said, it's fine then if our PLS responses are very different than what we report like to our board or our commissioners.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Janet would like to confirm that engagements are what we're counting as attendance to virtual programs.
Yes. Oh, I like simple, easy questions, Janet. Thank you. I also like questions where I can give the answer Michelle wants me to give.
I don't know if it's simple and easy though, because I have a whole thing with that, but that's okay. Because engagements on Facebook is different than likes and comments and views. It's very interesting, but
Okay,
yeah.
then maybe what is an engagement? Maybe I answered the wrong question. What's an engagement on Facebook?
I don't know, but I think it's probably a higher number, so I'm gonna just go with whatever the higher number is.
I like that answer. It's the same thing I would do in your shoes. Yeah. I believe engagements is what you should be counting anyway from the analytics side.
Rita says that a like is an engagement.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds right.
As I said, there are 2 new sections this year. The outreach section is state level only this year. We have been having this conversation at the state level. Why is outreach data important? And as I've said about other things, it helps us tell the story more accurately. It also helps you focus on, am I reaching, as Steve was just saying, market penetration? Am I serving the whole of my community? Whether you're a city, a county, or a city-county, you have to get outside the 4 walls of your building. You guys have all heard me say many, many times, libraries, public library, school library, academic library, special library, I don't care what kind of library you are the center of the community you serve. We are the source for accurate information. We are a place where people can come and have civil discourse about what's going on in our country. We can lead the way by having book clubs of relevant topics. There's so many ways that libraries impact. We believe it's really important to measure outreach. We want to actually encourage these questions be asked at the federal level. We believe it's that important. It's a process. I mean, if you guys have ever heard me use librarian as a verb, you know, we librarian things. Let me tell you, getting a question added to the PLS, it is librarianed the heck out of it. It's like a 3-year process because it has to be introduced, it has to be discussed, it has to be discussed some more, it has to be voted on, then the vote has to be discussed. Then it finally gets put on the questionnaire. And then you guys don't know it's being put on the questionnaire in time to actually count the data for the first year. So you guess at your numbers, and then you start counting in February or March of the first year. So then the second year, the numbers are more accurate. And by the 3rd year, after the 3 years it took to get there, we're getting good data. So we wanted to test out our questions at the state level to make sure we're asking the right questions. So here is my unofficial homework for you guys is when you're doing your PLS, please pay attention to the outreach section. Look at the questions that we have asked. If there are questions you wished we had asked around outreach and we didn't, let us know. If we've asked the questions in a way that is complicated, confusing, more librarian than they need to be, let us know that as well. If the definitions aren't clear, let us know. We're really going to ask you guys to communicate about this section with us before we start rolling it up to the federal level. So what is an outreach program? Programs the library sponsors, not held on the library grounds. And here we're defining library grounds as physical and virtual. So if you held it on your Facebook page, your YouTube page, via Skype, whatever, count that as library grounds, right? So you go to the school, you go to the park district, you go to the park, you go to the swimming pool, you know, whatever, you partner with another entity or you do it yourself. You're bringing the library outside the four walls, outside the virtual four walls. They may be programs presented by library staff or another presenter. So if you partner with, you know, Steve mentioned earlier, they partner with Extension. You partner with Extension, and because it's going to be a big program, you have it at the school. That's an outreach program. Drive-through programs held on library grounds don't count as outreach. Hopefully that's clear because of how we're defining it, as it happens outside the four walls of the library, whether physical or virtual walls. It may be that there's overlap between programs and outreach programs. Include them in both if they fit in both. Bookmobile activities do not count as outreach activities per the federal definition. There is a federal definition for a bookmobile. It includes paid staff, it includes number of outlet stops. You know, we're already counting that. This is separate from your bookmobile. So for the purposes of outreach and outside the four walls, consider the four wheels of the bookmobile part of the four walls of the library. So whether it's physical, virtual, mobile. Hopefully that's clear.
Mary, Jackie has a question. Her mic's
Yes.
not working. If we hold program in the park next door, which is technically not their library grounds, where is that counted?
I'm going to guess if I answer this question and Abby answers this question, we're going to answer it differently. The park is not technically part, but as I understand it, Jackie, you consider it an extension of your four walls. So I would say if you consider an extension of your four walls, you would count it just as programs. If you don't consider an extension of your four walls, you could count it as outreach. Is that clear? Abby, do you agree with that answer?
I do. And Jackie says we use it as an extension, yes, especially with their renovations. We do have another question.
Okay.
Sue Hansen says, so doing a virtual story time where we walk through the town would be outreach, question mark.
If it's a virtual program that's done through your usual virtual four walls, so it's done via your Facebook, your YouTube, your something else, no, I would not count that as outreach, because that we're defining your four walls here as the physical four walls of your building. Maybe you have 6 walls, maybe you're an octagon, whatever. The physical walls of your building. The virtual walls of your building, meaning website, social media, YouTube, all of that. Or the mobile four walls of your building, meaning your bookmobile. So to me, a program that's done walking throughout the town, but it's done through your usual virtual four walls would not be outreach.
Right. She says that helped. And
perfect.
That's all we got for chat right now. So
okay, great.
Hey,
So
Mary.
again, just think of the library as 4 walls, whether it's physical, virtual, mobile.
Mary, can I ask
Yes,
a question?
absolutely.
This is Nancy at Stanton. I've partnered with the city and I have a wellness program, which I get a key for the people that want to do this and they walk in the Civic Center. And they can go anytime they want. It's a $10 fee for the key for the city. I don't take that money up. And then I have a record of who walks and what day they walk. Is that an outreach or is that one of my programs? So they walk every day for a month. Is that one program counted throughout the whole year? And then I count these people that are doing this because we're doing this now at Stanton. And it's just helping when we do have snow and the city has decided that's the way to do. They walk in the Civic Center. So
How are you actually counting the attendees, Nancy? Because they have to come
they
get the
write their
key?
name down. They write their name down.
Because you have to physically hand them the key.
They have the key all the time. They go anytime they want, but I have a record of it. They'll sign their name. They walked on this date. And it's just our winter wellness because we can't walk outside. Well, we have been walking outside, but so at the end of the month, I go get that record and I'm wondering how to do that. I just came up with this last year and it's working, but I don't know if it's a program. It's a wellness program from Stanton and the city. Okay, I'm not charging anything and the city's not really charging anything. They're getting them a key to go into the Civic Center and, wipe it off. I have wipies there. It's just a good outreach program, I think, because we're small enough to do this and we don't have any kind of exercise place.
So this is where you would get a different answer from Michelle or me. I'm going to call this the Steve answer. Technically, per the definition, because you're not really interacting with them, that wouldn't count as a program. I would count it as an outreach though. If it were my library doing this, I would count it as an outreach program.
That's what we're doing.
For the number of participants or, attendees, I would count it probably as one program a month. And I would count the number of keys I handed out, not the individual number of times people walk. But, if 10 people got a key, that would be one program, 10 attendees.
And that would go on outreach.
Yep. We're going to call that the Steve rule.
Okay, I got it.
And Steve's giving you the thumbs up.
Well, it's just a good program because I do it and I need to do it.
Yeah, it's a great partnership. It's a great opportunity for your community. That's what I'm talking about, Nancy. That's what I'm talking about. Getting outside your 4 walls and providing a service. You are now the center of your walking community, girl. That's awesome.
And we listen to music. Sometimes we dance in there.
I want to come dance in Stanton. I love to dance. Awesome.
Mary, we have another question in chat.
Thank you.
I could answer, but I figure we should give the Mary answers.
Oh boy.
So this says, we offered home delivery during closures because of COVID. Is this considered a bookmobile or an outreach program?
This is one of those Mary Susie librarian practitioner doesn't necessarily agree with the answer she's about to give as Mary Susie State Librarian.
That's why I thought I'd throw the question to you.
I believe the decision at the federal level on that was that we do not count that as a program. Michelle, can that be counted as bookmobile? I had not thought of that, quite honestly.
Well, if they're reporting 0 for bookmobiles, because bookmobiles have scheduled stops and circulation of items on the bookmobile, I would say they would just count it as library circulation.
Okay. So they
of
get the
material.
circulation, but it has to be, can't be counted as open hours. If
Yeah,
it was during curbside only.
Yep, because they're not offering the patrons the availability of the physical library building to come in and browse the collection or access the computers.
I believe the question is if this is an outreach program.
Per the definition, it would not be a program. It would just count in the circulation of physical items category question.
I hope this is a great example to everybody on the call of why these questions have to get fielded at the state level before they get rolled up to federal.
Yes.
There are
And we have
some-
had many conversations already at the state level about definitions and questions and wording. And I hope, sorry, Abby, I cut you off. I hope it also showcases why it's important for y'all to give us feedback on this year.
And Steve and Jackie would like it to be noted that they believe that home delivery is a library service to the community. That catches us up on chat, commentary, and questions.
So they think it should be counted as outreach, or?
Jackie says to me, home delivery would be an activity. Steve says, I interpret home delivery a service, part of the library services provided to the community. And Jackie says it's an outreach service.
I agree it's a service to the community, but I also agree it gets counted in the circ numbers and not as an outreach program.
Yeah, I personally would see, the way I see outreach is an activity that you do. You go out to the community to bring people into the library. I think that's the general definition that I work with. The home delivery would be a service that's the library's providing. It would be like, you know, a photocopy machine. It is a service we provide.
Right, and you don't count that under programs.
We do not count that. We would not count that under programs. It would just be circulation statistics. So we have a Books on Wheels service. You could call it an outreach program, but really what we're doing is we're providing a bin of books to a couple of the senior centers, senior homes in the community. So technically, I don't deem that one outreach because it's not necessarily bringing people in, but we are providing that service so that people can still have access.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're counting circ statistics because of that.
Sure, and I think that might be a good distinction, Steve, service versus whether you want to call it program or activity or both. To me, what we're asking for in the outreach section is not about your outreach services, but about outreach programs and activities that you do to bring the library to people, but also to bring people into the library. Yes. We really appreciate your thoughts on this though, Jackie, and we will definitely reflect on that as we decide how to move forward with bringing these questions, you know, up the ladder, so to speak. Okay, COVID section. Again, a disclaimer. This Mary Susie, human being, practicing librarian, filler out of the annual report for 13 years, does not agree with what Mary Susie State Librarian is getting ready to share about curbside. I very, very strongly disagree. And not only has this been debated at the SDC, the State Data Coordinator level, but this has been debated very heavily at the state librarian level. I actually kind of sparked a little bit of chaos in the state librarians discussion list around this question. And we have been very firmly directed by IMLS how we are to proceed in this area when it comes to curbside. Most of the COVID questions are yes and no, so pretty easy. Question 11.14, the number of weeks during the year that due to the coronavirus pandemic, an outlet building was physically closed and the public could not enter when it otherwise would have been open. So if you provided curbside delivery during this time only, curbside only, or homebound only, the public could not come in the building. You have to count your building as closed for the annual report. 1115, the number of weeks during the year that an outlet implemented limited public occupancy practices. Excuse me. For in-person services at the library building in response to the coronavirus pandemic. So these are the weeks that you allowed people in the building, but you limited how many people could be in your space. Per IMLS, or IMLS as Michelle refers to them, curbside services do not count as open hours. I very strongly disagree with this. And I expressed that disagreement to IMLS, to my colleagues at the state library level, and inadvertently to Michelle's colleagues at the SDC level, because a state librarian shared it with their state data coordinator, who then brought it to the rest of the state data coordinators, and it sparked a fire. I mean, my name was being talked about all across this lovely country. And there are very strong opinions on this, on both sides, but mostly on the curbside doesn't count as open hours. If you were closed to the public and they could not physically come in your building, for the COVID section on the annual report, you cannot count those as open hours. We know that means that your open hours for this year is going to be less than normal. Like Michelle said, you can explain that in the note field, and then she won't have to follow up with you. But this is the decision that's been made at the federal level.
I personally don't have an issue with 1114 as far as, you know, that being stated. That actually makes perfect sense to me. And then the limited occupancy question also I do not have any problem with. However, if we did have times that the building was closed that we were still continuing to provide services, I think that needs to be noted. Because I think simply by saying, oh, curbside service didn't happen is pretty much what this is being said. And I think that is doing libraries a huge, 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 huge disservice to the fact that staff was still coming in and still doing the job. We still were paying people instead of laying them off and all the rest of that. I think this is a huge disservice to libraries to say curbside didn't happen. And this is by what this definition is curbside didn't happen. And I will use the word stupid again as far as that's concerned. And you, by all means, feel free to use my my name in relation to the word IMLS as being stupid about this, because I will happily tell them that to their face.
You know what, Steve?
It's insulting to those of us that did this.
I don't have a problem with these questions.
No.
My issue is when you report the hours open for this year, if you were closed to the public, even if you were offering curbside hours, you cannot count them as open hours. That's where my issue comes in.
Yes.
So if you did provide curbside service, please do note that in the note box.
Okay.
So that I can then reach out to IMLS and say, I want it noted when you are reporting on this data that libraries were open for curbside and they were continuing to serve their public. And that is my argument. I think it's a disservice to the libraries that remained open and provided curbside and provided homebound delivery and provided books on a cart outside their library that patrons could, you know, check out that way, and figured out a way, like Griggs County, because they have an actual legit foyer, they locked the inside door, left the outside door unlocked, and patrons could still pick up holds. That has to be part of our coronavirus pandemic story for libraries. And that's where I have the issue with not counting curbside service as open hours. But that's the decision that's been made, so that is what you have to reflect when you count your open hours for the year.
Yeah, I respect your statement, Mary, and yeah, but I think it is a huge disservice to libraries to just discount that curbside didn't happen. Our library building, we were completely shut down for 2 months. So no library services, no nothing. Doors closed, locked, nothing. And there were days that I was the only one that came in the building all day. And that was some of the most depressing times that I've ever been through. That was horrible. But when we restarted, you know, we went to curbside only, and we were curbside only for, I don't know, 6-8 weeks, something like that. We were here, staff was reporting, we were doing things, we were still serving our community as best we could. And yeah, I think that needs to be stated. And
I do think Steve's comment to note the curbside services is important.
And Mary, if I may make a recommendation, you know, send a recommendation out to all library directors who may, you know, because only a handful are here today for this, and this discussion may not happen in the next session, but send an email out saying, you know, for 11.14, please put in the notes section when you were, how many hours, you know, how many weeks or whatever you were doing curbside.
Mm-hmm.
And
home delivery.
Right, curbside or delivery, you know, the library was, the building was physically closed to the public, but the library was still providing services.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Work from home, answering phones, assisted patrons, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Jackie just posted on the chat.
Yep. Yep.
Mary, I just want to clarify. So I believe it's at the top, the first part, it says how many hours were open.
Mm-hmm.
That now changes too, even if we were here.
Yes. So if you were closed to the public, you don't count it as open hours of the library. So again, make a note in the, you know, add a note, as Michelle said, to say, you know, we were closed to the public, but we provide curbside or whatever, so that, because that's going to trigger an edit check, right? So when Steve said he was closed for 3 or 4 months, technically 2 months totally closed, 2 months only curbside. So for the definition, you were closed for 4 months. So when you do your open hours for the year, it's going to be drastically different from last year. So that would trigger an edit check. But if you put that note in there that we were closed due to the pandemic, we provided curbside for this number of weeks, then Michelle won't have to follow up with you. Does that make sense? Did that answer your question, Tracy?
Yes, and then, sorry, I wrote in chat too. What if we were open but by appointment? Because like we closed for a little bit because our numbers went up, but I was still here and available by appointment.
I'm going to guess Michelle and I would answer this differently. Let me punt that one to Michelle. Michelle, did SDCs or IMLS discuss appointment only hours?
I would say that would be public occupancy like Jackie had, or limited occupancy, that it would be reported as that, but you were physically answering calls, assisting patrons, that kind of stuff. So I would count that as a week open. When you, that week where you took appointments or whatever, answered calls from home or whatever, you know, and that kind of thing, I would count that as your weeks open because you were still providing services, albeit they were limited occupancy.
So if the public could come in the building, even if it was under limited occupancy, which by appointment would be considered limited occupancy, it does count as a week open.
I would say so.
Okay. Great question, Tracy.
I have a question on that.
Yep.
If we had we have like an outer lobby and we put our curbside items inside our library, but closed off, they couldn't like walk around in the inner parts of the library.
Mm-hmm.
Is that open or closed?
That would be closed.
Okay.
They have to be able to come into the library and use the space, not just into the foyer, if you will.
Thank you.
Janet asks about weeks, not days. For instance, we were closed Tuesdays and Thursdays for a while.
I wouldn't they're asking about weeks, not by days. So if you were open during the week, I would count it as open.
And then Michelle Seil said, what if hours were decreased, but the library was not entirely closed? I would count that as implemented limited public occupancy practices.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree to that?
Say it again. So the library was.
Hours were decreased, but the library was not entirely closed.
Yeah, that you were, well, no, Michelle, I don't know. I thought limited public occupancy meant either we limited the number of people that could come in or they were limited to appointment only. If the library was open, but it was open shorter hours, but anybody could come in, that would not be limited public occupancy.
We have quite a few questions in chat too.
Okay.
Okay, so.
And Michelle read some of the ones from chat, Abby, while you were on the phone.
How far did you get, Michelle?
I read Janet and Michelle Seils.
All right. So Rita said, what if some areas were or are still closed? Some areas of the library.
Can you give me a for instance, Rita? You mean like they can't go down to youth services?
She says no use of the community room and limited computers.
Gotcha. To me, I would not call that limited occupancy unless you're limiting the number of people that can be in the building. You're open, you're allowing people in, they just can't use your community rooms, but your community rooms aren't used, you know, all the times that you're open anyway. So I would not call that limited public occupancy practices for in-person services. Michelle might give a different answer, but.
I'm just looking at the definition, the federal definition, in regard to the implemented limited public occupancy.
Yep.
And it says if building did not have limited occupancy or similar practice due to pandemic enter zero. And then it goes on to say limited public occupancy practices can include reduced hours open, limits on number of public members inside the building, appointment only, on-site use, visitor time limits, closed stacks or meeting rooms, etc.
Okay, so it would count then. Thanks for reading that definition. So Michelle Seil, I was incorrect. Limited hours would mean you would count it as a week that you had. If you limited your hours, that would count as one of those weeks. And Rita, you would as well if the meeting rooms and the computers are limited.
But that catches us up on chat questions.
Okay. All right. So the next slide is just questions. The final slide is my contact info. That's really not important because who are you going to funnel all questions to? Michelle. Yay, Michelle.
I'll funnel the question to Michelle. So for some of these that we know the statistics are way off from last year. So I know our CERC numbers are horrible. They're just atrocious. On the notes, do we just put on the note COVID? Is that going to be acceptable? That we as the directors are aware that this statistic is totally screwy from previous years because of COVID?
Yep.
Will that be an acceptable way to do that so that it doesn't come up with a check thing? Will that work for you?
Yes.
And you're going to put COVID on an awful lot of questions.
Going to put COVID on an awful lot of things, exactly. But I don't, you know, if it doesn't come back with a data check, that will make Michelle's life much easier, not having to send emails and so on. Because I'm sure Michelle can probably assume that yes, this is our CERC numbers are horrible because of COVID, but I'm sure with professional due diligence and all that, she still has to follow up.
So to clarify, it will still trigger an edit check. It just won't trigger Michelle following up on an edit check if you put that note of explanation in there. So it really is in your best interest to put the note because that's going to mean Michelle contacts you a few less times. Maybe.
Well, and it's in Michelle's best interest as well to put the note in because she then doesn't have to make the phone call or send the email or whatever. And
right. But our goal is to make this. We know. I mean, I know intimately what the annual report means and what it takes to fill it out. And some of you have heard me say this before, the annual report and state aid, which was called something else in Illinois, but the equivalent of the state aid was more complicated than what it is in North Dakota. I have a friend who's a librarian in Indiana, and every year around this time, I want to stop following her on Facebook because I don't want to read her comments about the annual report, you know, and I always have to like, I'm sorry, but it's important information. So I totally get that we're putting a burden on you, right? It's not completely an unfunded mandate because if you don't do this, you don't get state aid, you know. But we do know that that the annual report is a lot of work, and we want to decrease the burden of the annual report to the best of our ability. So if we can give you a mechanism to avoid Michelle having to follow up on an ed check. Now, disclaimer, this doesn't mean Michelle won't follow up with you. There may still be something she has to follow up on. So don't hear me saying, oh, Michelle's definitely not doing any edit check follow-up. She will still follow up with you if she needs to. But if the answer truly is COVID, and there may be some things that went up this year. Your database usage may have increased. Your website visits may have increased. You know, some numbers may go up. Your ebooks hopefully went up. That will still trigger an edit check if it's significantly different than last year. So again, if your ebook numbers increased, your database has increased, your website increased because of COVID, and all of those legitimately increased because of COVID, because more people were coming to your library to figure out how to get an ebook or to figure out how to get to universal class. Put COVID in there as well. You know, it's not just if numbers are lower. Now, if something is significantly different, not because of COVID, don't put COVID. I'm not giving you a blanket to just write COVID in every single box when that's not the reason for the change. Hear me clearly, peoples. Don't lie on your annual report. Don't lie on your state aid. Be honest. Remember that whole consistent, accurate info? Be consistent and accurate in your notes as well, please. Don't put COVID if it's not the reason. But I know it's the reason for the majority of them. I really do know that.
Well, one place for us that I know will have an increase is our wireless.
Yes.
And actually part of it is we've got a better mechanism for reporting.
Okay.
Now, so we got a new wireless interface toy that we've got, and so we now have more accurate information. So that's the reason for that. We had a hardware upgrade basically, and I'll put that into the note.
Put that in the note. Absolutely. Yeah.
As to the why, but that I think, you know, that's one of those legitimate, that's non-COVID using Mary's.
Right. And it could be a combination of hardware upgrade, better numbers, and COVID, more people were using the Wi-Fi at the library. It could be both. You might have had people sitting outside your library using your signal if that's an option. So, but that's a great example, Steve. Thank you. I didn't have an example I could pull on my brain that wouldn't be COVID driven, but excellent. So, Abby, I have not been monitoring chat at all. Were there any questions asked in chat that we haven't answered or addressed? No.
No, at this point, all is clear in the chat.
Perfect. So this is the opportunity where you guys can unmute yourselves if you want and ask other questions you may have. Or if you don't have a mic that's working, feel free to throw it in chat and I can monitor that now as well.
And as this is coming into the collection process for the next year, being we're in January of 2021 now, I will make it a point to sit down with Mary and Abby and see if we can differentiate virtual pre-recorded programs and passive programs and get categories for all of them on the 2021 annual report. And once we've made decisions as far as the in-state in regard to those, we will try and communicate that information out to you as quickly as we can so that you guys are aware and can start differentiating between the different categories for next year.
And we'll probably reach out to a couple of you that commented. Steve and Jackie, you both had thoughts on this. So we'll reach out to you to get some feedback from you as well. If you're someone that has thoughts or an opinion on this, please do let Abby know that you'd like to chat with her about this. You can put it in chat now. You can give her a phone call. You can shoot her, you know, an email. because we really would like your feedback on, we want to make the questions useful to you. We want to make the data useful to you. I will note that even if we come up with questions for passive programs, Michelle, Steve is still going to count a program as a program as a program, even if we have lower categories. And we recognize that, Steve. And from my perspective, that's fine because you're consistent. But for those of you who haven't been counting passive, we'll give you a mechanism to count those.
Well, I mean, I have no problem counting passive programs as a passive program, but it's still a program. That was my point of contention.
But when we ask that at the state level, that won't roll up to the federal program numbers. So that's when you have to decide what counts as a program at your library.
Well, everything. Anything to make our stats look good. Fellow directors, folks at the state library, plug your ears and go la, 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 la. Fellow library directors.
This is being recorded, remember.
Yeah, I know. You know, obviously we want to do this. We want to do this accurately and consistently. That's the big one. But we want to make sure that we get our statistics, because this is important, because we do bring this back at the state level, the federal level, but also at our local level too. So that, you know, it is important. And the other thing is, now having done that's coming into what, my 8th year of doing federal, the annual report in North Dakota, which looking at who's on the list here, I think am I now the longest serving director on the list on this call today?
Maybe. Oh, Tracy's 12 years.
12?
No.
Sheila's 10. Okay. Yeah, Sheila's been here. Yeah. But the thing, really, the annual report should only take an hour. If you've done all, it really, I can knock it, because throughout the year, I've got everything all put together. The annual report really should not take that long, because I've put all my statistics on a, what did she do to me?
I need to put my mask on so you can't see my look of surprise.
Oh, I thought she was giving me BS or something
no,
like that.
No, wow, I admire that, Steve.
But
I will say, if it's taking you more than an hour, it's okay, because I did it for 13 years and it took me more than an hour.
I've got an Excel sheet that has probably 85, 90% of the statistics that I need to put in. It's the weird ones like, database usage and so on, which that's always a point of contention. 2 hours, yeah, maybe I'm exaggerating at an hour, but it really should not be this big, huge, mind-blowing, oh my God, this is horrible. If you've taken your stats and done them through the year.
So Abby, do you want to put Steve's email in the chat so people can reach out to him for that spreadsheet?
Library director at vcbclibrary.org. Please feel free to contact me for any of this stuff, because I am happy to help people.
I think that's wonderful. And it's one of the things I love about all libraries share. I'm not saying they don't, but to have a tool that will make the annual report so easy is really wonderful. And I think it's great that you're willing to share it, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just
it is horrible, but she can sit down and report in a couple hours.
It's a pain, but I had, well, it wasn't last year, it was Cindy, do you remember, it was 2 or 3 years ago, I had the annual report in and submitted like less than 3 hours after it was sent out.
Yes.
We laughed. We actually laughed when that came in. It was like, did he just make up numbers? Because how could you do it that quickly? I was like, do I need to call him? And they were like, no, it's good. I'm like,
no,
really?
It's a matter of being organized. It really is not, if you've got your statistics. Now it's usually where the hell are the overdrive numbers? But now overdrive, so those of us that are on overdrive, they have those numbers on their interface now. Yay, this is much easier. It's a couple other places. And then usually, because of the way stuff is put in our integrated library system, is how many nonfiction do you have versus how many fiction, and this, that, and the other. always okay, now I need to count this and I need to count, so there's a little bit of math that's concerned with it. But
if you're a non-automated library, I strongly encourage you to reach out to Steve, and Abby put his email address in the chat to get that spreadsheet to help you track this stuff more easily.
Yeah, it is. And if you're not automated, I happen to know a really good automation system that's not hideously expensive that we've now been using for 7 years that I will be happy to crow about how wonderful it is and how wonderful their service is and so on. And they still won't give me a card.
And I will happily crow about Odin, because Odin is much more streamlined than it used to be. We can get you a price for Odin. You can email Ellen directly. They have a formula that they use. And so if you are not automated and you want to be automated, Abby put our LibGuide in the chat about automation, but you can reach out to me. You can reach out to Steve. I know Steve's really happy. He's worked out some of the kinks for the vendor to make it a better product. But there are options that are affordable if you want to automate and you're not. That's not what this call's about. But see, I'm old school. I keep saying the call. That's not what this webinar is about. Are there other questions? Hopefully what you're going to walk away with today is a better knowledge of why we're asking you for the data and a better idea of how we use it. And even though it is a burden, maybe that lessens the burden a little bit, knowing the impact that the data is making. And at the end of the day, if you want state aid, do your annual report. Pain in the butt or not, at the end of the day, if you want your state aid, do your annual report. That's the number one reason to do the annual report right there, folks. If you don't, you can't get state aid.
And it's a developing level standard for library vision grants. And
you can't get library vision grants. So you want the money, do the work. But hopefully you have better, bigger, reasons why you would do it as well. The other thing I will say, and again, it took me longer to do the annual report, even though I was an automated library and I got a stack of reports from my consortial staff every year. And, once I got an admin assistant who knew Excel so well, it was easier, Steve, I will give you that. But maybe it's that organized thing. But one of the other reasons I always liked the annual report, it was really easy to tell the story of the impact my library was making to my trustees. In Illinois, I was a district library, so that meant I worked for the trustees. My trustees were elected. That's who my governing body was. I didn't get funding from the city, but I still used the annual report to tell the library story to anybody who stood still long enough to hear my elevator speech. It also helped me share it with the staff, for those of you who have staff, to say, look at what we did this year. Look at how many people came to our programs. Look at how many people walked through our door. Look at how many people visit us virtually. In a pandemic, especially, we're all struggling this year. I hope the annual report brings you a measure of comfort and peace to know that you made a difference in people's lives in 2020, because every one of you made a difference in at least one person's life in 2020. And this is going to help you tell that story.
It would if I could count my non-live Facebook stuff, Mary. Just saying. I got a lot of thoughts on that, Abby. I'll call you because I did a lot of that because I added a lot of graphics and stuff to all my stuff, just so you know. But anyways, I do have a question too about that.
Would you like the number of someone at IMLS so you can call them?
Yeah, I would. I'll call them. I got no trouble with that. I'll let them know.
I want to.
Could you say you're from South Dakota?
Tracy goes after IMLS.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so only live can be counted, and I get that only the views on there. Now I'm just looking on my phone so I can hopefully get an answer to this question. On the little bottom it says that I got 53 views, but how do I know that those are during that time? How do I count that statistic. Is that what I count?
I think that's the point that Steve was making, is you can't tell who
Yeah.
viewed it live and who didn't, so count all of the views.
Okay, thank you.
Now, what Steve said, if I understood him correctly, well, you didn't put yours on YouTube, did you, Tracy? Yours were strictly on Facebook.
I did, but I did no live programming on YouTube. It was
Your live was strictly through Facebook.
Yep, and then I put the recording of the live on YouTube, so I'm not going to count any of that.
Gotcha.
I'm just going to get a whole little
YouTube
channel.
So I would count the views, because if you can't separate it, you can't separate it. And I am not going to tell you not to count those programs, because they were legitimate programs. It's what you did. So
with Facebook, when you dig into some of the stats stuff under Facebook, and it's under the Insights tab, you can actually look at some of what happened at timescales. So you might be able to figure out who was watching live. We've been trying to do that and have not been overly successful trying to figure some of that out, because Facebook really isn't set up that way, but you can kind of make some guesses that are relatively educated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Facebook just didn't think about how important it is that libraries have these statistics that we can do in our annual report. I think it's a horrible, horrible oversight on Facebook's part.
We could do a whole webinar on the mistakes that Facebook has made, Steve.
Oh, God.
So, Tracy, that may be easier to do on a computer than your phone, the Insights. But here is what I'm going to say. And again, Michelle will come in and kick my ankles for this too, probably. And I'm okay with that. I've got strong ankles. Well, I don't, but that's okay. Don't stress yourself out over this. If you can find the information the way that Steve said, do it. If not, count your views. And that is Mary Susie, State Librarian of North Dakota. That is not Mary Susie, plain human being. Mary Susie, State Librarian in North Dakota. And this recording is going to be out there on YouTube, and who knows who's going to stumble across it. I am completely comfortable with my statement. Do not make this incredibly cumbersome. Do not add stress to your life filling out the annual report. Now that I know how easy it is for you guys, it's only 2 hours out of your life. We're going to make state aid a little more difficult now. Just kidding. You know, but seriously, count what you can count to the best of your ability. Be consistent. If you hear nothing else from me today, be consistent and as accurate as humanly possible. Does that help, Tracy? Great. Wonderful, wonderful questions, everyone. Let me know if this information was helpful, if it was relevant. We probably should send an evaluation out, but quite frankly, I just thought of that at this exact moment in time, so we're not going to. So if you have thoughts about how we could improve, please just drop me a line. You have my email, you have my phone number. If you want to tweet at me, my name changed to NDSL Mary Susie, I believe is my new Twitter handle. So, but you can give me a phone call. You can email me. If you have an email I've sent you, you also have my work phone number. That's 701-516-6166 is my work cell. You can call me on that as well. So thank you everyone for spending 2 hours of your day with us today, 2 in a few minutes. I hope it was really beneficial. And I look forward to sometime this year, hopefully seeing all of your lovely faces in person and being invited to your library for a librarian for a day. We are offering virtual librarian for a day. So if you want to have me come visit your library virtually, you can do that as well.
I'd love to see you weed virtually.
Challenge accepted, Steve. Challenge accepted. I don't know how, but I will get rid of it. Done, gone. Yeah, I can't do the sniff test virtually, so I have to come up with a different method. But in all seriousness, thank you, everyone. We always appreciate when you give us any of your time. We know how precious your time is. And hopefully we used it well today. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.